So welcome, Andrew, our beloved colleague and visionary leader in our community, doing so much for so many. And as always at Setsi, we begin all things by acknowledging our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Andrew, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and share a bit about your remarkable work?
Thank you, Victor. I'm so happy to be invited to be part of the amazing work that you're doing and having great leaders come on and talk about philanthropy and community and impact. I have had a chance to watch some of the YouTube videos. Some of my favorite colleagues have been on there, and it's been wonderful. I'm with the Community Foundations of Canada. I've been there a little over 10 years. I was at the London Community Foundation before that, and I was there for about 16 years. So I've been in philanthropy for 16, 17 years now, and it's been great fun. I was speaking with a group of leaders a couple of nights ago in Toronto at Foundation House, and I was talking about my first couple of years in philanthropy. I joined philanthropy in 2007, and it's night and day compared to what it is now. It was very celebratory. It was an environment of good feelings and positive spirits, and doing good positive work. And it's been an exhausting past few years, and I think some of that commenced with the pandemic and being locked down, and kind of the world changing in so many different ways while we were staying at home. And I still feel some of that exhaustion, but philanthropy's also changed too, and not in a bad way, but in a way that it's a bit exhausting. We're all trying to continue to be relevant and do impactful work across the country, but in new ways that's really stretching us. And that takes a lot of fortitude and courage and energy as a leader. And I just need to acknowledge that it's also been exhausting too. So, but it's good. The fact that we are exhausted means that we're working hard and we're trying to change things. So, and I think a lot of my colleagues feel that way. I know that they've been telling me that. And, so I think to your question, what have we been working on? We've been working on change. That's what's front and center for us.
Indeed, I couldn't agree more. And I really appreciate your vulnerability, your candor, and your consistent leadership. You've always been a beacon of light and hope in the ecosystem, but more importantly, honest. And I think that level of authenticity is so needed, especially in these trying and, as you said, tumultuous and daunting times. So once again, I appreciate your candor. My next question is, what's inspiring you right now in this ecosystem? Like what has you curious?
I think it's like the whole ecosystem of philanthropy. Everybody's trying to do things differently, and everybody's trying to innovate. Call it reform, call it transformation, call it just change. And I think that's the big difference between now and 10, 17 years ago when I came into philanthropy. So that's exciting, and it's inspiring. I have no idea where we're going to be 10 years from now. And I think that's also exciting. It's just not knowing, but knowing for sure it's going to be vastly different than what we have now. The impact community. There was no impact community 15 years ago. Like, it was just starting. And I remember the task force on social finance when those reports came out, and there were recommendations, and I got a nice copy of the report. I had it on my desk. I read it, and then put it on the shelf. And who would have thought that in Canada, in the United States, all around the world, we have thriving impact communities that are doing magnificent things around social change, but also looking at how we can deploy capital in vastly different ways. And I know that you've heard the term global poly crisis. It's impacting the elements of the poly crisis, impacting every part of the world in a significant way. And the way that we have been conducting quote unquote charity in this country since its inception is not going to meet the moment in terms of the poly crisis, but the impact community will. And it's a community that has amazing leadership, youthful, diverse leadership that's willing to do things differently. I think the key ingredient, the thing that they're missing, is capital and support. And that's where philanthropy is. We have capital, we have the capacity to offer support and community to help these leaders, to help build sustainability around their organizations so that they can meet the moment and change the trajectory of some really, really harmful patterns that are playing out in our communities and in our environment. And I have a lot of confidence and hope in what they can do. Our best people, like our best graduates from universities and colleges and entrepreneurship, are showing up in this sector. And I talked about when I joined philanthropy 17 years ago, that was not the case. Our best people did not see the impact sector or the charitable sector as a place where they can have purpose and meaning and fulfillment. People are showing up now in this sector and are finding an opportunity for meaningful and purposeful work. And I'm really hopeful that that'll lead us on a pathway of change.
Ashay, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. So my next question, what challenges and barriers do you face in your work? And what are some of the approaches your team are utilizing to overcome some of these barriers and challenges?
Yeah, I mean, they're not unique ones. The philanthropic sector has been around a long time. And when you've had a sector and institutions that have been around a long time, they develop habits. We're a very habitual group of people. And we've got deeply entrenched practices that have served us well. And there's a reason why we have a lot of those practices. But we really have to sort of take stock on whether those practices continue to serve us well and continue to serve our communities in an optimal way. And that really, it really sort of puts a lot of things in front of us, which is how are we going to change those things? What things are we going to let go of? And what I've been seeing is a desire to build new things, but not much of a desire to let things go. And you know how life goes, Victor, right? If your world is full, and your capacity is completely taken up, nothing new is going to show up because there's no space. And I think we have to create space. And the best way to do that is to figure out what are the meaningful, tangible things that we need to let go of so we can allow for new things to emerge. Examples of that are, things that we have in community foundations are, we carry a lot of restricted funds. And so, these are funds that where our donors have set up gifts, but under the direction of donors. And those have been really good products for us to bring to community and to have an impact. And at the same time, we've been incredibly successful creating more restricted funds. But at the same time, this is where we become a victim of our own success. It's hard to collate and bring to some coherent strategy a set of funds where we have to manage and negotiate and arbitrate its direction. And I think we have to rethink our relationship with donors. We have always been an intermediary between capital and how that capital is deployed in the community. I think we have to look at our intermediary role and find out how we can align the enthusiasm and the generosity of donors with the most optimal needs in the community that include granting, but go beyond granting as well. Because if we're going to meet the moment where we have all these converging trends in front of us, call it economic inequality or economic insecurity or climate change or normative threats, we're going to need as much resourcing and leadership as possible to deal with some of these challenges.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. The donor advised fund framework has always been something that's remarkable because it gives folks an opportunity to contribute to meaningful intermediaries and organizations. But when we're in a time of crisis, especially crisis in philanthropy, there needs to be some level of nimbleness to be able to pivot. And that's challenging with some of the restrictions that are obviously at play in terms of the ecosystem. So I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for your candor and providing all that context. Because that's really important. The contextualization of those sentiments. So my next question is, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work?
Yeah, there's lots of priorities, and we talked about the growing impact community. Um, you know, the infrastructure is there, the leadership in the institutions, and there's more and more people showing up in that space, but they need capital. And I think both public foundations and private foundations, I know many of them are working these processes through internally and with their boards of directors on how we can deploy more capital into that sector, because that's where the innovation's happening. And so that's a definite priority for me. The second one is, what I call, I sort of categorize it into the question, how do we keep philanthropy relevant? And I think there's just a lot coming at us with, artificial intelligence um, uh, the work that we're doing with donors and how we sort of reshape that relationship. Or how we serve communities that have not had access to philanthropy. Call those northern communities or communities that are equity seeking or minority communities. How do we bring philanthropy into those spaces? And we've had work around clarification on working with non-qualified donees, et cetera. So that continues to emerge, and that's a definite priority. But also like this transformative space too. How can we do things like completely differently? So how do we completely change our business models? And that's really where the letting go of needs to happen, right? And I think new institutions of philanthropy are going to show up. I can't imagine, we talked a little bit about your kids and my kids before we started taping. I can't imagine, those kids of ours are going to show up and say, hey, the model that my dads were working with, like those are those are the models we want to keep working with. I can't imagine that. And I think that's a question that every leader needs to ask themselves, because we're all like not all of us, but many of us are perpetuating the existing and old models. And why? The next generation's gonna blow it up anyway. So what are we really holding on to? And it should be easy when you sort of think about it that way, that perspective. It should be easy to just walk away from some of these old ways of thinking and traditional ways of running philanthropic organizations. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So why not let it happen with us and give our children and the next successive generations a better opportunity to put something forward that can meet the moment.
I couldn't agree more. One of my favorite authors, Franz Fanani, said, each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And I think that when you speak about our children, we always, every day we wake up with that why. How do we make this world a better place for our children, our ascendants, and their children? And I think I'm hoping that they'll be trading seeds or agroecology or food sovereignty will be the goal and not fiat currency, ideally.
Right.
Yeah, so my next question for you is a perfect segue. How do you feel about the future of philanthropy in Canada? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Are you hopeful?
I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic because, and I already mentioned this, the leadership that's showing up, new governors and new leaders are showing up with vastly different ways of looking at the social issues that we're dealing with. And I think I'm most optimistic because of the impact community and what they're trying to do. They have an uphill battle, but I think there's going to be an inflection point, and that will I think we'll see some acceleration as capital flows continue to move into that space. We also need a lot of courage, and I think younger people don't bring in the baggage that somebody like myself brings in, And I'm always worried about stakeholders who are invested in traditional ways of thinking, and oftentimes that can be a significant constraint, especially when you represent a large conglomerate of community foundations. But I think there are new leaders coming in with new ideas, with less baggage. They'll have more fortitude than somebody like myself, and they'll really push through a lot of meaningful changes, both at the business model level, but also in terms of the way that we just think and process information.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal, and what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleagues?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche, right? And it's something that both you and I have heard all the time. You want to leave something better than the way that you found it, right? And I feel that way about community foundations. I feel that way about the world that we're in. And at the same time, like I just feel like it's such a heavy time. There's war and there's conflict and there's increased polarization, and it just feels like we're so far apart at times, as a nation. And I think philanthropy has a role to play in that. I was sort of juxtaposing the world of philanthropy when I came to it 17 years ago. I was often told, like, you don't have, when you lead philanthropic organizations, you stay away from the political fray. You don't need to express points of views and opinions on everything that happens in the world or in your community. You just do the good work, and that's why it was a much happier place back then. But it was less effective. And I think now we do have to ask ourselves these questions, which is, what are our points of view? What is our role when it comes to conflict and harm and trauma that people are experiencing? And Canada is a global country, more so than it ever was. So things that happen in different parts of the world impact our community right here, right where we live. We can't pretend like, hey, that's somebody else's problem. We're all connected to different parts of the world, right? I think you're in a different part of the world right now. You've been in a different part of the world for a long time. And so it matters. It matters what happens in the country, and it matters what our opinion of it is. And I think when we started to talk a lot about DEI frameworks as an example, and I don't know when that conversation really took hold, but I felt like, especially during the pandemic, it accelerated, but it was happening before then. I think we really need to understand those frameworks a little bit better. We need to refine them. We need to improve upon them, because they're important frameworks in how we understand people and identity and where they're from, not simply putting bums in seats that are racialized people or take into account gender or those things, but like really understand what identity means for different people, because I think that enriches who we are, but also helps to shape how we might look at issues of tension and harm and trauma and conflict in our communities and deal with it in a different way.
I couldn't agree more. We're in an era and time where lived experience, social location, and intersectional identities are sometimes under attack. And when we look at not just the ESG pushback, but the DEI pushback south of the border of us, there is a need to advance justice, access, inclusion, diversity, and equity in all forms of our work. And as our elder Cornell always said, that justice is what love looks like in public. So I agree with you completely that we need to center those approaches because it benefits us all. Especially the most vulnerable of us. So my last question to you, Andrew, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and viewers?
Oh boy, I probably have many, but I think we're in an important moment, and it's going to require energy. And I think we have to do some evaluation of our current way of being, and understand why we are why we are and why we do things a certain way. And then we have to ask ourselves, are those things, in an honest way, are those things continuing to serve us and our constituents? Not by making people comfortable or causing them to feel safe. That's not the game that we're in. I think we're trying to go from our current way of being to a new way of being, and that is not going to feel good. By definition, it's not going to feel good. But I think it's necessary. And oftentimes the process is what impedes us from getting to a better place where we will feel better about what we've done. But there is a temporal space where it's not going to feel good. And I think leaders need to confront that. Because I think leadership is what takes us forward, but it's also what's going to hold us back. And so it really is a call out to leaders to do that self introspection, to really question yourself, your motives, your associations, and think about how we can bridge towards something that's better, because the status quo is not going to get it done. We will fail if we try to hold on to the past.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your candor, your wisdom, your guidance, the deep introspection, and all the actionable insights that you shared with us. You do so much for so many, Andrew. Thank you. We really appreciate you. And as always at Setsi, we close the way we began by acknowledging, giving thanks to our creator, acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Andrew. So appreciate you.
Thank you, Victor. It was an absolute pleasure.